We are going to look at solving by factoring. And what we're talking about when we say solving by factoring is that we're going to be solving equations, but they are equations that involve x squared terms. So that is, and we talked about this when we learned how to factor ax squared plus bx plus c. So we're going to look at factoring this in order to solve the equation. So remember that when we solve, we are trying to find the value of x. So we want to know what value of x is going to make the equation true. So first thing that I want to mention is that most of our problems will be trinomials. The only condition is that a cannot be 0. We could have a 1 right here. We could have any other number except 0. And then b and c can be anything. So we could have something that doesn't have a constant term, or we could have a problem that doesn't have a middle term, but we will always have an x squared or even higher. So first thing I want to do is to go through what the steps are, and then we'll actually work an example. So here are the steps to solve by factoring. So first thing that's going to happen is that we need to get the equation equal to 0. So get equation equal to 0. So we're going to move everything on one side, and then it would say equals 0. All right, second thing that we're going to do is factor completely. So factor completely, so that's what we've been working on. The third step is we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So set each factor equal to 0, and I'll show you what that means in just a second. And then the fourth thing that you need to do is solve the equations. So first up, let's try, I think we've done this one a lot, but we might as well use this example again. M squared plus 8m plus 15 equals 0. So first thing we need to do is get the equation equal to 0. That's already done, so step 1 is done. Next thing we need to do is factor completely. So when we factor completely, we start by looking for GCF, and there isn't one. So now we just need to look at this trinomial, and we need to factor it. So I'm looking for factors of 15 that will add up to 8. So what will multiply to be 15 that adds up to 8? So hopefully you are thinking 3 and 5. So that's step number 2. So factor completely. So now what we're going to do is set each factor equal to 0. So I'm just going to go to the side a little over here just to explain this. So this is saying that two things multiplied together equal 0. So if we multiplied, let's just say we multiplied 3 times x and we got 0. We know that in order to get 0 as an answer, we must have multiplied by 0. So in that case, we know that that would be 0. All right, let's say that we had x times y equals 0. So here we're multiplying two numbers together. The answer is 0. So what we know is that if the answer when we multiply is 0, then one of the things we multiplied must have been 0. So either that is 0 or that one is 0. And we just don't know. So if this was a 2 and that was a 0, the answer would be 0. If this was a 0 and that was a 9, the answer would be 0. So what this is saying is that either the x is 0 or the y is 0. We just don't know which one. So the way that that relates to this is that I'm multiplying these two things together and I'm getting an answer of 0. So what that means is either m plus 3 has a value of 0 or the m plus 5 has a value of 0. And the point is, I don't know which one it is, so we figure out both of them. So that's step number 3, is set each factor equal to 0. And now step 4 says to solve. So if I solve this, m is negative 3. And if I solve this one, m is negative 5. So that tells me that the solution to this equation is that m could equal negative 3 or negative 5. And that's usually how we write our answers. Now, it's not an ordered pair. I'm just listing the two answers. All right, let's try another one. So for example 2, let's do, how about 6x squared plus 36 equals negative 42x. So looking at the steps to solve, so back up at the top, first thing we have to do is get the equation equal to 0. Well, this equation isn't equaling 0. It's equaling negative 42x. But we want it to equal 0. So in order for this to equal 0, I need to add 42x. So if I come over here, I'm going to end up with 6x squared plus 42x plus 36. So the deal is that I need to get this moved to the other side. So all I did was I added 42x over here to get it to cancel, which means I have to add 42x over here, and I know that the proper order, that should go in the middle. All right, so step 1 is complete. Get the equation equal to 0. So next step, we need to factor completely. So first I want to look for a GCF, and I see that there's a GCF of 6. So if we take that out, we have x squared plus 7x plus 6 equals 0. All right, so now I'm left with a trinomial. So I want to see if I can come up with numbers that multiply to be 6 that add up to 7. And I can think of that. So numbers that multiply to be 6 but add up to 7 would be 1 and 6. So now step number 2 is complete. I have factored this completely. Step 3, we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So 6 was a factor, x plus 1 is a factor, and x plus 6 is a factor. So I'm setting each of them equal to 0. There's nothing to solve here, so that one's just eliminated. For this one, we would subtract 1 from both sides, so x is negative 1. For this one, we would subtract 6 from both sides, so x is negative 6. So for this one, my answers are negative 1 and negative 6. And the deal is that it could be either one of those answers, and if we fill them back in, we would check and see that they do in fact work. All right, let's see. Let's do another one, if I have enough space. I think I do. All right, so example 3. How about 8n cubed plus 16n squared equals 42n. So just to do the same one, similar to that one. Okay, so first step, we need to get this equal to 0. So I need to subtract 42n from both sides. So if I put that in the correct order, that's going to come right down here at the end. So equals 0. So step 1 is done. I got the equation equal to 0. Step 2, I need to factor completely. So I need to look for a GCF, and all of these can be divided by 2n. So if I factor out 2n, that's going to leave 4n squared plus 8n minus 21. So factored out a GCF of 4n. All right, so now I need to look at what I have left. So I have a trinomial here. And so I'm just going to go over here and do my x. So I'm looking for negative 84 and 8. So I need to think of two numbers that would multiply to be negative 84 but add up to 8. And I know 7 and 12 would give me 84, but that's not going to give me the 8. So I need to think a little bit deeper. But I happen to know that 14 and 6, if I multiply 14 and 6 together, I'll get 84. Now, in order to get a negative 84 but a positive 8, it's going to be a negative 6. Now I need to reduce by 4. So this would be negative 3 over 2. This one would be 7 over 2. So when I take those two back over here, we have our GCF, and then 2n plus 7 and 2n minus 3. So now we have factored completely. All right, so now what I need to do is step 3, which is to set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to say 2n equals 0, 2n plus 7 equals 0, and 2n minus 3 equals 0. So now I need to go through and solve. So here I would divide both sides by 2, so n is 0. For this one, we need to subtract 7 from both sides and then divide by 2. So subtract 7 from both sides, divide by 2. On this one, to solve this, we need to add 3 to both sides and then divide by 2. So add 3 and then divide by 2. So here, for this one, our answers are 0, negative, and you could rewrite this if you want. I'm just going to leave them as improper fractions, though. So those are the answers for number 3. So now I want to show you a very cool fact. So this is a cool fact. So I'm going to say cool fact. All right. If you notice, this question we got 3 answers. This one we got 2. This one we got 2. So it just so happens that the coefficient of the leading term is going to tell you how many solutions you should have. So this one was a squared, so we should have 2 answers. This one, the highest exponent is 2. We got 2 answers. This one, the highest exponent was 3, and we got 3 answers. So a cool fact is the exponent on the leading term. So the exponent on the leading term will tell you, how many solutions, let's see, how many solutions you will have. So that's just a neat way to check. So this exponent right here tells me I should have 3 answers for n, and I do. This one right here tells me I should have 2 answers, and I did. This one tells me I should have 2 answers for m, and I did. So just to recap again, the steps to solving by factoring. First thing you need to do is get the equation equal to 0. You're only going to be able to get this correct if your equation's equal to 0 before you start. Then you're going to factor completely, set each factor equal to 0, and then solve. And on example 2, when we looked at this, we had 6 equals 0. There's nothing to solve there. But down here, we did have an n. So divide both sides by 2, and we get 0. So as always, if you need to go back and re-watch the video, please do. And we'll practice some when you get to class.